Welcome back, everybody. Today we're doing a deep dive into something I think a lot of businesses really struggle with, especially if they're looking to expand internationally. And that is employee dismissal in Japan.
Yeah.
Now, most of you have probably heard that Japan has a really strong reputation for protecting their employees.
Absolutely.
So how does that actually play out when a company needs to, let somebody go?
Right.
It's not as simple as it might seem in other countries.
Yeah, it's, in a lot of places, employment is seen as much more, kind of transactional, right? But in Japan, it's considered a long-term commitment.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, almost like a social contract between the employer and employee.
I see. So then what does that commitment look like when maybe things aren't working out and you need to dismiss an employee?
Well, it means that there's a very specific set of rules and procedures that you have to follow.
Okay.
And you really need to make sure that you're doing everything by the book. You've got to dot your I's and cross your T's to stay on the right side of the law.
So where do we even begin to break this down?
Well, first off, you need to know that there are 4 main ways to dismiss an employee in Japan.
Okay.
There's normal dismissal, disciplinary dismissal, suggested dismissal, and then employment redundancy.
4 ways. Okay. It's a bit more nuanced than I was expecting.
It is.
Can you tell me a little bit more about those different types of dismissal?
Sure. So let's start with normal dismissal. This is typically the method that would be used when an employee can't really fulfill their job duties. Maybe they lack the necessary skills, or their performance isn't meeting the standards that have been set, or they have some health issues that are preventing them from working.
Right.
But, and this is important, you need strong, very solid evidence to justify this.
Okay.
We're talking detailed performance reviews, warnings that have been given. And if it's health related, then you would need to have, medical documentation. Really, really important.
It sounds like documentation is everything here.
Oh, it is.
There's no room for just a casual, hey, this isn't working out kind of conversation.
No, very much so.
Okay, so that's normal dismissal.
Right.
What about disciplinary dismissal?
Okay, so disciplinary dismissal is when an employee has done something really wrong. We're talking serious offenses like fraud, theft, harassment.
Right.
And this is where things are a little different from normal dismissal, because in these cases, you can dismiss the employee immediately.
Okay.
And there's no legal requirement to give them severance pay or a notice, period.
Wow. That's a big difference.
It is.
So I guess that's because it's treated more like a breach of trust than anything else.
It is, absolutely.
Okay, and you mentioned 2 other types, so what about those?
Right. So the third one we have is suggested dismissal. And it may sound a little bit gentler than it actually is.
Okay.
This is usually used when the offense isn't quite serious enough to go down that disciplinary dismissal route, but essentially the company is going to try and persuade the employee to resign. Voluntarily. It's much more of a negotiated exit, but there's definitely some pressure involved.
So I imagine to navigate that one properly, you're going to need a lot of tact and some really good legal advice.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, and then lastly, there's employment redundancy. What does that look like?
Okay, so that comes into play when a company has to let somebody go because they're restructuring or downsizing.
Okay.
But even in these cases, it's not just a simple layoff, like you might see in other countries.
Right.
The company still needs to have a very clear and strong justification for why they've made this decision. And they are required to negotiate with labor unions, really trying to keep that impact on the employee to a minimum.
So it really sounds like even if a company is going through tough times and they're facing like some economic hardship, they still have a really strong obligation to the people that work for them.
Yeah. And you got to remember, this is all happening within a culture that puts a huge value on job security and loyalty.
So that social contract we were talking about earlier really just adds another layer of complexity to this whole process.
It does.
Yeah.
And to be honest, for companies that aren't very familiar with all the ins and outs of Japanese labor law, it can feel like a minefield. There's a lot at stake.
Yeah.
Reputationally, financially, legally.
Yeah, just listening to you talk about this, it's making me think that it would be so valuable to have someone to guide you through this process.
Absolutely.
Especially if you're a foreign company and you're trying to figure all of this out.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that local expertise can be absolutely crucial.
Yeah.
You need to find a partner who really gets it. understands the Japanese legal landscape,
Right.
and can give you the support and guidance that you need to make sure you're staying compliant and protecting your interests.
So it sounds like if a company is serious about doing business in Japan, they shouldn't try to go it alone, especially when it comes to something as sensitive as employee dismissal. Because like you said, it's one thing to know the rules. It's another thing to know how they're actually applied.
Right, exactly.
In practice. So speaking of partners, I understand that there's a company called INS Global.
Yes.
That specializes in helping businesses with these kinds of challenges. Can you tell me a little bit about them?
Yeah. So INS Global is a leading professional employer organization. It's also known as a PEO.
Okay.
And they really specialize in helping companies expand internationally.
Okay.
And they have quite a specific expertise in the Japanese market.
So how does INS Global actually help with these kinds of tricky situations that we've been talking about?
Well, they offer a whole bunch of services that are tailored to businesses operating in Japan.
Okay.
Including, helping them navigate these very complex dismissal procedures.
So it's not just about knowing the law. It's about knowing how to apply it in these really, really specific real world scenarios.
Exactly. Yeah. And they can really help you to understand those nuances, the cultural considerations, the potential pitfalls to avoid, all that kind of stuff.
That's incredibly helpful. I'm sure anyone listening right now who is thinking about expanding their business to Japan is probably taking notes.
Yeah.
But let's, before we go any further, I do want to dive into some of those very specific requirements, especially when it comes to the notice period and also the rules around severance pay in Japan.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great place to pick up.
Okay.
So in Japan, there's a mandatory 30-day notice period for most dismissals.
Oh, wow.
Regardless of how long an employee has been with the company. And, it's really about giving them that time to prepare.
Right.
But then it gets even more complex when you're talking about collective redundancies. So that's basically when a company needs to let go of a larger group of employees.
Right. And I imagine that involves a lot more negotiation and planning than just letting go of one person.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in those kind of situations, the company has to follow a very specific process of consulting and negotiating with labor unions.
Right.
And they need to come up with this plan to support the employees that they're letting go.
Right.
And it's definitely not something that can be done overnight.
No, I imagine not, it sounds like. Like the process is really designed to protect the employees, even in those tougher economic situations.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about severance pay.
Oh, okay.
I know that in a lot of countries, severance pay is standard. But is it actually required by law in Japan?
So this is where it gets interesting.
Right?
You might be surprised to hear that Japan doesn't legally require severance pay.
Really? That is surprising.
It is.
Especially given how much emphasis they put on employee protection.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that companies don't offer it.
Right.
In fact, because there's such a strong emphasis on negotiation and avoiding these legal battles, most companies do provide severance packages to their employees when they're dismissed.
So it's almost like an unspoken rule then.
It is.
Even if it's not something that's specifically in their legal framework.
It's much more common to sort of come to that agreement to make sure that you can kind of smooth things over and reduce that risk of a legal challenge.
Right. And that makes sense given everything that we've talked about.
Yeah.
So what are we looking at? Like, what's the typical severance package look like in Japan?
Well, it does vary depending on the situation.
Sure.
But generally, severance packages in Japan can range from 6 to 12 months of the employee's average salary.
Wow.
Which is...
That's significant.
Yeah, it is. And again, it just goes to show how seriously they take employee rights.
Absolutely, yeah. It's clear that Japan has a very, very different approach to employment than a lot of other countries in the world.
Yeah.
So for companies that are looking to expand into this market, when it comes to employee dismissal, what are some of the key takeaways that they should keep in mind?
I think the most important thing is to remember that documentation is absolutely vital.
Okay.
Every single step of the way, from performance reviews to any sort of disciplinary action that you take, to the termination meetings, everything needs to be very carefully and thoroughly documented.
Right.
If a dispute does come up, having that really clear paper trail can be, make or break.
Right. So it's not just about doing the right thing. It's about being able to prove that you did the right thing
Exactly.
every step of the way.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
And I think the other key takeaway is to always aim for that negotiated settlement. It's so much more efficient and cost-effective than ending up in court, which nobody wants.
Right.
And that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about seeking out that expert guidance. Because having someone in your corner who knows exactly how to deal with these situations can be, absolutely invaluable.
It can make all the difference. And that's where a company like INS Global, who we were talking about,
Exactly.
really comes in, because they're the people who can provide that local expertise and make sure that you're handling all these procedures correctly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And speaking of INS Global, I know that they offer services that go beyond just helping with employee dismissals. Can you tell me a little bit more about some of those other services?
Yeah, so their PEO services can take care of a whole range of those HR tasks.
Okay.
Things like payroll, benefits administration, even visa applications if you've got employees from overseas.
Wow. So they really are that kind of one-stop shop for businesses looking to get into Japan.
Yeah, they take care of all of the admin and the legal stuff so you can focus on actually, running your business.
Yeah. And I imagine that peace of mind for a lot of companies
Oh, absolutely.
is worth its weight in gold. So for our listeners who are interested in learning more about INS Global and how they can help them with their expansion plans, what's the best way to reach them?
I would encourage them to just go directly to the INS Global website.
Okay.
They've got loads of information there. And, the team is always happy to answer any questions and discuss how they can tailor their services to your specific needs.
Fantastic. So it sounds like they're really committed to helping businesses succeed in Japan.
They are.
Okay. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about those really unique challenges of employee dismissal in Japan, those different types of dismissal,
Yeah.
the importance of documentation, negotiation,
Yeah.
and really those benefits of working with a company like INS Global
Absolutely. Yeah.
to help you navigate all of this.
It's a complex topic, but I think we've managed to shed some light on those key considerations that companies really need to think about
Yep.
if they're looking to move into the Japanese market.
And I think the biggest takeaway for me is that although Japan offers a very highly skilled and dedicated workforce,
Oh, they do.
it's essential to understand and respect the intricacies of their labor laws.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. Taking the time to understand the cultural context, the legal framework, and the potential pitfalls that are out there can save companies a lot of time and money and stress in the long run.
Absolutely. Well said. And for those of you listening who are ready to explore those opportunities that Japan has to offer,
Yeah.
I highly recommend reaching out to INS Global,
Yeah.
because their expertise can really, truly make all the difference
I can.
in navigating this market. So if you're looking to expand your business into Japan, don't wait. Contact INS Global today and tell us about your expansion project.
Wow. I think we can all agree that was a really eye-opening look at employee dismissal in Japan. There's a lot more to it than meets the eye.
Absolutely. Yeah. Japan's an incredible market.
With a lot to offer businesses.
Yeah.
But you really do need to make sure you've got a good understanding of the rules, especially when it comes to something as sensitive as, ending that employment relationship.
So as we wrap up, what's the one piece of advice that you would give to businesses that are thinking about expanding into the Japanese market?
I think don't underestimate the value of that local expertise.
Okay.
Partnering up with a company like INS Global that really understands the ins and outs of Japanese labor law and business practices can really be the key to unlocking success in this market.
They can be like your guide, your translator, your advocate, all in one.
Exactly. Yeah. And that peace of mind really lets you, focus on what you do best,
Right.
which is building and growing your business.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for anyone listening out there who's feeling a little bit overwhelmed by everything that we've talked about today, just remember, you don't have to figure this out on your own.
Right.
There are resources available to help you navigate all of this successfully.
Yeah, and taking that first step to understanding those unique aspects of the Japanese market can, it can make a huge difference to your long-term success.
Absolutely. Great advice. On that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. We hope you found it informative and maybe a little bit less intimidating than you might have expected at the beginning.
It's a complex topic, but with the right knowledge and the right support, it doesn't have to be a barrier to achieving your business goals in Japan.
Absolutely. So to our listeners, if Japan is on your radar for expansion, just remember, do your research, understand the cultural nuances,
Right.
and most importantly, don't go it alone.
Don't go it alone. Seek out that expert guidance.
Yeah.
And you'll be well on your way to building a successful and rewarding venture in Japan.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And if you're looking for that expert guidance, you know where to go. INS Global. They are the pros when it comes to navigating the complexities of international business. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep